Welcome back to Footyology and to our very own newshound, the Age's John Perrick. What are you doing there?
Thought I'd swap seats this week.
Okay, well, I'll tell you why you're there. He's done very well this week because instead of looking at what the cat dragged in, he's dragged in the cat. We've got the president of the Geelong Football Club, Colin Carter, with us. G'day, Colin.
Good to be here.
It's good to have you as our very first guest. Now, cat's going well as per usual. How's your long-running campaign to have all those old VFA premierships acknowledged in clubs' tallies going?
Well, it's an interesting place to start, but it's going well, and I think we'll get there. And the reason we'll get there is because the history is undoubtedly correct. I don't know whether you want to be bored by hearing about, but
you bore us quickly.
What happened was I always thought that in 1897, when the VFL started, they discounted the prior history at that point. That's clearly not true. I think the history was revised in the 1930s or the 1940s, perhaps when the early VFL founders had moved on, and when the relationship between the VFA and the VFL was toxic. But it's very clear, for example, after the show I'll give you a copy of the front page of the VFL record in 1915, which shows every premiership side back to 1872, and there are no asterisks. They saw it as a continuous history back as far as that. And so we've moved at Geelong to amend it, and we're not, we think the AFL will get there, but for example, at our last season launch, we inducted Charles Brownlow, whom most people have heard of, into our Hall of Fame. In the AFL records, Charles Brownlow is shown as an administrator, but he was the captain of the Geelong 1883 premiership side in a competition, by the way, which consisted only of teams which became part of the VFL and which part of our history. So to say that time in history wasn't our own is
it's a reasonable argument. I think Port Adelaide might end up arguing the same about their Sandford premierships.
Port Adelaide's history was in a different competition. All 6 teams that Charles Brownlow won the premiership against were teams like North Melbourne, Carlton, Melbourne, St Kilda, Essendon. So Port Adelaide's got a wonderful history, but most of that was in playing against completely different teams. And so the issue that we're wanting to address is, when did our competition start? And if we disown that period when 11 of our 12 traditional teams are in the VFA, we disown the right to the oldest football competition in the world, and we certainly deny the efforts of the people whose efforts meant that we're so strong today. There is no doubt Melbourne was the richest city in the world in the 1880s. People were wealthy enough to have leisure. We had a fixtured football competition, and there's a great article in one of the papers talking about how 30,000 people turned up to the Lakeside Oval to watch South Melbourne play Geelong.
Burns game.
Just amazing stuff, and those are the guys who put the platform in for what we have now. And the early VFL founders owned that history. So when I was accused at the start of being a historical revisionist, the revisionists are the other mob who sometime in the 30s and 40s, and which created this myth which has continued ever on, that history isn't ours.
Let's just cut to the chase. How many flags do you win?
Another 7.
Right. Okay.
And that puts us equal with Collingwood, which is more than passing interest. But that's not really the point. But that's a collateral advantage, and it's one of the reasons why St Kilda was less interested in it, probably.
Well, we need more wooden spoons, so thank you, because we'll get them. There is just one thing on that. I mean, the argument against it is there weren't grand finals. These occasionally were arbitrary decisions because teams played against VFA teams and also had to factor in games against country teams and local teams. And the ladders are up for debate, I must say.
Well, the ladders aren't up for debate in most of those. For example, in 1896, which is completely whited out of AFL history, there were 13 teams, 11 of ours plus Port Melbourne and Williamstown. And what people don't realise is that in 1897, when we started our game, there are any number of things which would be unbelievable to people now. For example, the 2 teams started on opposite sides of the ground, and the ball was kicked off, as in rugby, in 1897 in the first AFL year. So, and the way in which we reached our premiership side has changed a number of times through the first 30 or 40 years in the VFL. So, with great respect, Mark, what you just said is nonsense.
No, he doesn't deserve respect.
Speaking of premierships, Colin, is the current Geelong team built for a flag this year?
Every club would like to think they're built for a flag. We're very excited about our player group, but our footy people said to me, it's a bit like getting a big Christmas present, and you know there's something really interesting in it, but you're not quite sure how it's all going to shake out. A lot of these guys are strangers. We had 4 or 5 guys come back from long-term injury last year, plus the 4 guys who came in as through the trading period. And so we've got 10 or 11, 12 people who've hardly played with each other in their careers. And I think our view is that's going to take a while to shake down, but we're pretty cautiously optimistic about where this group can take us.
If you don't make the top four, is that a disappointment?
Every year it's a disappointment to us. Last year was a disappointment, but this year it would be too.
So, yeah.
You know, on face value, Colin, it's been a great start to the year. 3 out of 4. Dangerfield's bedded in and a local hero. But then you've got to remember the passing of Paul Couch really casts a different light on the year for Geelong. And I think Geelong, the football club, played a really central role in the grieving process and the celebration of his life. Can you just talk us through what you did and how you handled that difficult period?
You mean the club?
The club, and how you prepared the club, how the club
Well,
was
the club
ready
didn't,
and available.
The club really didn't need preparation in the sense that I think the club, we set out like all clubs to honour our past players, and Couchy went far too early, and so the club offered all the support that we could give without being intrusive to the Couch family, and they were grateful for the support. I think for a lot of the former players from that era, it was a shock to know that one of their guys had gone, because you don't normally assume that, and so it was for them probably more emotional than for a lot of the current players who really didn't know him. But I thought the club handled it pretty well, and I think the family were very appreciative of what we did. And Couchy's embedded in my memories. I can still recycle memories of him. His left foot kicks down to the forward line. Beautiful player, but sadly gone. But it's a reminder to all of us. And one of the things I think our footy club's been good at is a strong conviction that football's not the only important thing in life, and in fact we believe our guys play better football if they've got other interests, and Couchy's untimely death reminds us that there are bigger issues at stake, and make sure your family and loved ones and all that sort of stuff are well looked after.
I want to ask you a two-part question. Obviously the Essendon drug saga continues to roll on, and just when you think it's sort of winding down, something else crops up. Now the Nathan Bock thing's come up. Dean Robinson has been a very integral part of that. Just playing devil's advocate here, I'm just thinking about the guilt by association thing. Now, a lot of people are asking the question, why have, say, Geelong not got off scot-free, but why have there not been more searching questions asked of Dean Robinson's time at Geelong, given that he's now sort of tainted by what happened when he was at Gold Coast and what happened when he was at Essendon?
Well, first of all, there were searching questions asked of Geelong, and the AFL unleashed a forensic audit on us. And Deloitte's forensic audit team came in, and every email for 10 years was investigated, and absolutely nothing was found. And I think with Dean Robinson, who I barely knew, I met him just after I got involved in the club back there. You've got to remember, he went to Gold Coast on the basis of recommendations from Ken Hinckley and Gary Ablett, and then went to Essendon on the basis of recommendations from Mark Thompson and Brendan McCartney. I mean, Dean Robinson was regarded as a good soldier and a good contributor to our club, but he wasn't in charge of a whole area. And I'm not in a position to say who and where and under what circumstances people subsequently lost their way, but that period at Geelong has been absolutely looked at and as impeccable. And contrary to what sometimes appears in the paper, Stephen Dank has never been employed by the Geelong Football Club.
How do Geelong and the other power clubs of the competition now view Essendon? I mean, it seems like the stain is going to remain on their reputation for a long time. Yeah. They seem to have worked reasonably hard as a club to do what they can to repair that. Yeah. How far are they along the track to restoring their reputation, do you think?
Well, I think, their reputation was obviously damaged, and the reputation of the AFL was damaged. I think they've made a lot of progress this year, and in part it's because of the spirited response of their players on the field. And I think there's a general acceptance and respect for John Worsfold, who's a really good character and is a person who can really lead them out of that. It's not fair for those of us who aren't part of the process to have too strong views about how Essendon handled it, but I'm not a fan of the way the club handled it all through that period. And I think one of the problems they've got in terms of public perception is if your constant position is, we don't know what our players did, but we're sure they've done nothing wrong. They're actually two mutually exclusive statements. You can't actually believe both of them. You either know what they did or you're sure they did nothing wrong. And I think that if you think of all of the other areas where institutions have got into trouble, whether they're banks or churches or whatever, if you sort of said, well, we don't know what our people did, but we're sure they did nothing wrong, then there's no closure or accountability embedded in that. And so I think that's why this hung around as a sort of a stain for longer than it probably needed to be. I feel really sorry for the players who were It's a wake-up call to all of us that players have got to ask questions, and I don't blame them particularly. You might argue some of the senior players might have arced up a bit earlier, but I think it was a failure of good process within the organisation, and there, but for the grace of God, go a lot of us.
We've seen the pressure Richmond and Collingwood under at the moment, particularly with their coaches, Damien Harwick and Nathan Buckley. I think Chris Scott's contracted to the end of next year.
Yeah.
Well, when do you start to look at that and how you're sort of going to manage that situation?
I come from a world in which contracts aren't part of our lives. I mean, CEOs don't have contracts anymore, in fact, and you're not allowed to have payouts of more than 12 months. And so, to some extent, footy's a bit behind the times with this. But I'm just amazed at how, in an 18-team competition, when it is absolutely inevitable that it's going to be 1 to 18, and you can't fudge whether you're success or failure, that people are out for the coaches so early. We're only 4 games into the season, and I mean, we're 3-1 and probably lucky in one of them. It's early days. I have enormous respect for Chris, but even more importantly, we've got a really good team of people around Chris, and so and it's never just one person. The coach is obviously a really crucially strong person in it, but no.
So that's something for next summer or later, do you think?
Yeah, probably so. But I'm much more interested in what Chris is doing in 10 years' time. I'd love to be the first club that has a successful senior coach and encourages them to take a sabbatical. Come back with batteries recharged, and I think we'll get there.
I think a lot of us can relate to that.
How long a gap could you have though for a sabbatical?
I reckon if with the structures they've got these days, and everybody, I mean, footy coaches traditionally saw themselves as completely indispensable because they probably were. They ran everything, but if you couldn't give them 3 months, say November, December, January, or something like that.
Not miss a season though.
No, I don't see any reason for that.
Yeah,
give them 3 months to go and charge the batteries.
Colin, just one last quick one. From your time as Commissioner, there's a bit of heat on Mike Fitzpatrick. Some saying his time might be up, maybe Travis Auld or somebody else. How do you view his leadership of the Commission, and is there still life in Mike Fitzpatrick as the boss?
Well, there's still life, although he's been there for a period of time that most people would start to say you're getting to the end of your tenure. I mean, there's no precise time, but I'm not supportive of a lot of the criticisms that are made of Mike, because I think it represents a misunderstanding in the footy community about what the role of the chairman of a board is. And if you go to the corporate world, it's absolutely clear the main spokesman is the chief executive, and the role of the board is to oversee the management. And one of the journos called me up recently to inviting me to slag off at Mike about his low profile as chairman. So I said, well, who's the chairman of the company you work for? And he had no idea. And so then I asked him, well, who's the chairman of BHP, biggest Australian company? He said, well, is it, and he mentioned a name, and I said, well, no, he's never worked there, and he's certainly not the chairman. So I think most of the role, like Gillon McLachlan is the chief executive and is the main spokesman. I'm not saying the chairman should be invisible, but the notion of the celebrity chairman, which footy clubs traditionally had because all the knowledge was in the board and the management was probably the part-time bar manager, is a thing of the past. And so I think Mike's been partly criticised unfairly because people got the wrong view of what the role of the board is.
Well, I think you're a celebrity chairman now, Colin, having appeared on Footyology. Thanks for being our first studio guest. Make sure you tell your friends and family, and good luck with those extra premierships.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
And it's great to have somebody from Geelong in a leadership role that doesn't have crazy hair.
That's right.